Alright, so it's time to choose a fretboard. This is the fretboard I pulled off the prototype, so it's good for sizing. Just deciding which piece of spotted gum to use. It is, in my opinion, really beautiful timber. Alright, so I have chosen this piece. It's the piece with the bit out of it, the longest piece. So this is it in daylight, rather than those yellowy industrial lights, although it is overcast. So the board isn't completely straight. It's got a bit of a curve. I don't know if you can see it. It's not too bad. It's only slight. It's fairly long. So I think, yeah, so if it's this way up, the ends are a little bit high, and this way around the middle is a little bit high. I did put the straight edge on it, and it actually looks pretty flat with the straight edge. The straight edge isn't long enough to see the curve, so there's a couple of pretty flat sections in it, which I could probably get 2 fretboards out of this piece as far as the length goes. Now if I do slices, technically you could get 6 fretboards out of this. I probably won't. If it was dead straight, you probably could get 6 fretboards. I'll probably end up maybe getting 4 fretboards out of this, if I want them. I only really need 1 at the moment. So anyway, I'm going to flatten this up a little bit and then we'll put it on the bandsaw. I need a flat surface for the bandsaw, so as I'm running along the fence, it's obviously flat, and so I get flat cuts. I was wearing my gloves because my hands are freezing cold, but my gloves kept hitting the sanding paper. I was going to wreck my gloves. So I was using my hands, but I haven't got much to grip on. Originally I used those gloves because they've got rubber on the fingers and the palm, so you can grip stuff, you don't have to squeeze as tight. This is heavy wood and it's being so thin, it was just a bugger to sand. So I'm using a Lucy's trick. I put down some masking tape, got a couple of blocks of wood with masking tape. Just going to put some super glue on it and glue on some handles to make it easier to sand. I've been sanding this hours. It's because it's fairly long, and because it's really just the end part here, it's curving away at the ends. As the further I got into it, the more of it I have to sand. So I'm basically now, you can see here, this end still looks pretty rough. We're starting to sand up to here, but sort of this section here just appears to be a bit low. It hasn't reached it yet, or it might have reached in parts, but we've still got these rough bits. So I'm having to sand basically the entire rest of the board down to get to this level, so it's a lot of sanding. Apologies for the wind, I hope it doesn't affect the audio too much. That did the trick, focusing on the ends. Then I went back and did just a little bit focusing on the whole board again at the end, just to make sure it's kind of level. So it is now pretty much flat. It's still slightly, I can just see a little bit of light under the center here. So it is slightly concave, but generally it's pretty good. You can see most of the sort of low points here are gone. I don't know if you can tell, but there's still a couple of bits there. They've got a little bit of sawdust you can tell in there. So there are a couple of little low spots, like dints in it. This side, they had lots of little dents and things in it. It's smoothed out a lot now. It feels smooth to touch, but I can see spots here with sawdust and stuff in it, quite a few actually all around here. But they feel smooth. So they are obviously a little bit rough there, or a little bit dense, but they can't feel the dents, and I can't feel it. It doesn't feel rough. I could go and keep sanding and make it all sort of like this, where you can see your reflection in it, like it's really shiny, but there's no point. I'm now going, it's flat enough that I can now go and cut it confidently on the bandsaw. All right, so I have set the fence to 7mm. I've got my workbench here, my OB workbench, which is kind of good. It's actually height adjustable, as you can see here. It also tilts. You can tilt the top to about 45 degrees, I think, but it's height adjustable. It can go up quite high, so it's actually works out well because I can get it to the same height as my saw table, so I can push the wood across onto the table, which will be kind of handy. Which one would you have? On the good side, I've taped down my blocks of wood, and this is the rough side. You can see, hopefully you can see. That's where we cut. It's got lots of ridges on it because the saw blade vibrates, but I'm going to try and get this to a uniform thickness and hopefully get it flat. Welcome to another exciting episode of Sanding Life. It's getting there, like I'm getting some nice flat sections as you can see, but we've still got some deepish grooves to get through. This is the part now that takes a long time because we've got lots of nice smooth timber we're having to sand down to get to the rough bits. The rough bits should sand pretty quickly once it hits them. It's getting down to that level is the hard part and tedious. So my trick of tilting it a little bit while I'm sanding, not actually lifting off like that, but just putting more force on here, has worked to a degree, but this is still thinning out too quickly in comparison to this side. So I'm going to use my other trick of sanding like this, just keeping the part I want to sand on the sandpaper, the other part's not even touching the sandpaper. The problem is though, I still have a fair bit to remove of this, and a lot of it's on the side that's thin. So anyway, we'll get them the same thickness and then reevaluate when I get to that point. I've got this down to pretty much my desired thickness, but I can see that these grooves here aren't going to be removed. I don't want to go any lower than 5 mils on the fretboard, because by the time I radius it, it may get down to like 4 or even 3.5 mils on the side. I don't want to go any lower than that. So I'm going to fill these in just because I want this to have good adhesion to the neck. So I don't want any spots where glue, glue might fill that in, wood glue, and do the job, but I don't want to risk it. Alright, so I did the glue. It turns out the glue that I used, the Loctite glue, wasn't as thin as I'd hoped. It was much thinner than the really cheap glue I'm using, but it didn't flow very well. So I left it there for a while too before I hit it with Boost. I left it there for probably about 4 or 5 minutes before I hit it to let it flow into the grooves a bit more. So I've been sanding it, it's going quite well. This end is getting pretty flat, this piece here. This is still a little bit raised because it's such like a lump of glue, I guess. It's getting fairly flat here. It's not so flat just this bit here. And this part is getting quite flat. So I'm worried now that I'll end up sanding more of the wood, and then this will take a while to get down. And by the time I get it down, this will be a thick area compared to those areas. So I'm actually going to hit this with a sanding block now. Success, or at least I think so. So you can see where the glue has been, and you can probably see there are still some lines that are filled in at the moment with sawdust, and those are the ones that are visible. The ones that look a bit dark are filled in with glue and are very smooth to the touch. So there's a few areas there. So there's a few tiny bits of lines, like those lines there, I can barely even feel them. They're very small. The wood glue should fill those in no problem. And there's not very many of them anyway, and might actually help it grip. I probably actually will have to rough this surface up a little bit before I glue it on anyway. Just making some circles with some 80 grit or something like that, a bit of a circle motion to give it something to grip. Preparing now to put the fretboard on. So the surface here, I'm just going to put some masking tape over the truss rod. Now this is temporary. I'm not putting any pressure, by the way, on this knife. I'm just dragging it across. You don't want to leave it there because it's higher, right? So you could end up with a bulge in the middle of your fretboard from it. This is just as I've glue getting in it, and then I'll pull it off just before I glue it down. Alright, so That's going to go there. We can put a pencil mark there so we know where the glue is going to go to. So we're going from our nut line, which is up there, and that looks about right, to there. So here, we definitely need this end to make sure it's well cleaned. I forgot to take the masking tape off. I'm an idiot. Okay, welcome to my giant workshop. One of the largest workshops in the Southern Hemisphere. So what we're doing, we've glued on the fretboard, and right now we have it sticking over the edge here. I thought about running the bearing of a router bit along here and just slicing it all flush with the width of the neck, which makes sense. The only thing is, because I've been getting so much tear out with this timber, I'm terrified of running the router along the edge in case it rips a chunk out somewhere. So I want to sand it down. So on this edge we're fairly close, and I think I might just sand it. On this side it's sticking out a fair bit, so I'm going to use chisels just to whittle it down a little bit, and then I'll sand it flush. Hopefully my hand's not covering up everything I'm doing here, is it? Can you actually see what's happening? You can. So I have one hand on top of the chisel just to stop the chisel going wild. I can put a bit of pressure on the chisel when I want to. It's a little bit too big a chunk coming off there. So I will attack it from the other side now. It's amazing, like you just get stuck on these little bits of, it'll travel along smoothly, and then you just hit a little bit of this cross-grain stuff and it jams. Like here where I'm hitting it, there, so here it's smooth as silk. I get to this bit here, we can see how it's cross-grained there, and it's just like trying to cut concrete. Then it goes smooth again, and this is where you get caught, because you try and push a little bit harder to get through that cross-grain bit, and then you hit a smooth bit, it just goes whoop, goes through it like butter, and you find all of a sudden you've gone really deep. So I just started using 60 grit on here, and I can notice even using 60 grit I'm getting little bits of tear out. I mean 60 is pretty rough, but I'm getting little bits of tear out. So that's interesting. So when I get close, I'm going to have to get away from the 60 grit. So I've finished sanding it, the sides now. A bit of glue here has to come off, but that's fine. It's not bad. Not bad. You can see what it looks like there a little bit. Probably get a bit of an idea now what the guitar is going to look like when it's finished. So the next step I would like to make is to radius the fretboard. First though, I want to make sure that the neck is still flat, because once you glue this on, it can change the neck, who knows. We did have a slight bit of relief, just a little bit, which is what I want. I want that to be the same on this, because once you put the frets in, it tends to make back bow. I definitely have back bow now, so it's now curving this way, which is the opposite of what I want. Let's try the middle here. So, you can see how it pivots, and you can see the pivot point is about here, which means that's the high spot. That's the high spot's the same there, and the high spot is the same place no matter where I put it, which is good. So I may come in and sand here, or actually probably I'll just use a radius block and I'll focus more heavily on this central section, sort of from about here to here. I'll focus on this section more. That should fix this up a little bit, and then hopefully completely fix this end. If I could completely fix this end, make that flat all the way to here, and then just having it die to this last little bit, that'll be perfect. Radius block, we're using the 14-inch radius. This is 60 grit, I think. Alright, so I've just started checking with my 14-inch radius checker, and up this end of the neck here, it's not too far off actually. I can see a bit here where it hasn't really been sanding. It has definitely sanded a lot of this edge, but off that edge, so my sanding hasn't been very good. I haven't been sanding much off this side, so I've got to fix up my technique. I can see here it's a little bit here and a lot here, so really have to fix that up. Down the middle here, that's about smack on now. It has started taking off a bit of material from the whole fretboard, and so that's really actually now starting to look good. Down this end though, not much has happened. So the sides are coming off, but this whole middle section I can see it from about here, like this, and then coming in about here, hasn't really been touched. Okay, so it's looking about right now. The surface needs to now be sanded with a finer grade of sandpaper to smooth it out a little bit more. I probably won't do that just yet though, because we've still got a bit of work to do on the rest of the guitar, and I might end up denting this or something. I'm going to cover it with masking tape, but I may end up denting it or scratching it or something, so there's no point giving it sort of final sand now. We'll wait until just before we put the frets on before we do anything like that. We, me, you, us, we. Okay. Thank you for watching. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to see more, consider subscribing to CheapSkate.